Welcome back to our channel. Stop. That 1983 Washington quarter missing its D-mint mark just sold for $15,300 plus. Plus, 2004 D Wisconsin quarters with an extra corn leaf error have fetched up to $16,000. And state quarter double die, off-center, or planchet errors. Collectors are paying hundreds, even thousands. Check your change. It could be a gold mine. In 1996, the United States Mint continued its long tradition of producing millions of quarters to meet the demands of commerce. That year, the Philadelphia and Denver Mint struck hundreds of millions of clad Washington quarters, each bearing the familiar bust of George Washington on the obverse and the heraldic eagle on the reverse, a design the country had known and trusted since 1932. For most, these coins were unremarkable. They clinked into cash registers, disappeared into vending machines, and wore down in pockets without ceremony. Yet, within this ocean of ordinary coins, a few extraordinary pieces were born, unassuming yet destined to change the lives of those who noticed. The mints, in their rush to meet production quotas, operated under intense pressure. Dies were constantly swapped, polished, or even used past their prime. Somewhere in the shuffle, an overlooked flaw emerged. It wasn't obvious at first. It didn't scream out at the press operators or quality control workers. In fact, it blended into the process so subtly that few ever noticed. But those who eventually did would never forget the way the light caught on its strange surface, the way the details whispered of something rare and accidental point one evening at a quiet coin show in Ohio. A longtime collector shuffled past the usual tables, his eyes scanning row after row of silver, copper, and clad coins laid out under glass. He wasn't looking for anything specific. His hands were tired, his eyes weary from decades of searching for elusive treasures that others had overlooked. His name was Gerald. He paused at a dealer's booth, flipping idly through a tray of common state quarters when his fingers brushed a 1996. He nearly set it aside. What could possibly be interesting about a clad quarter from that year? But he stopped, turned it over, and his breath hitched. IT wasn't quite right. At first, he thought it was just worn down, but then he tilted it under the harsh fluorescent lights and noticed something peculiar. The eagle's wings seemed off, flattened in places, almost ghost-like. The letters in United States of America appeared doubled and stretched, as if they had melted mid-strike. He turned the obverse toward himself, and sure enough, Washington's profile bore similar distortions. A faint doubling traced his jawline, and the date, 1996, shimmered with a subtle but unmistakable echo that Gerald's pulse quickened. He had seen double dies before, on pennies, nickels, even the famous 1955 cent, but never on a 1996 quarter. He held it closer, almost afraid to blink, as though the phantom images might vanish. Other collectors had gathered around by then, curious to see what had caught his attention. Whispers rose, then hushed. The dealer leaned in and frowned. He hadn't even noticed when he'd thrown it into the tray. To him, it had just been another worn coin. But Gerald knew better. In the weeks that followed, Gerald sent the coin off for authentication. The wait was agony. Days stretched into weeks, and still no word. He found himself visiting his safe every night just to reassure himself the coin was still there, its muted luster a silent promise of something more. Finally, the envelope arrived, bearing the insignia of a respected grading service. He tore it open with shaking hands. The certificate confirmed it, a dramatic double die, visible on both the obverse and reverse. The graders noted its sharp doubling on the lettering, the eagle's wings, and the date. One of the most pronounced errors they'd seen on a modern quarter. Gerald's heart soared, and yet, even then, he couldn't have guessed how far this journey would take him. First, offers trickled in, modest ones. A dealer at another show casually suggested a few $100s, trying to hide his own excitement under a veneer of disinterest. But Gerald declined. He knew the value of patience. Word of the coin began to spread among collectors, whispers turning into chatter, chatter into full-fledged buzz. As others began hunting through their own collections, more examples surfaced, but not many. The error was rare enough to remain elusive, and each confirmed piece only added fuel to the fire. By 1998, prices were climbing. Auction houses started including the error in their catalogs, describing it as a striking example of modern mint mishaps, a vestige of a time when even state-of-the-art equipment wasn't immune to human oversight. One coin sold for just over $1,000, another for nearly twice that. Yet, oddly, the market cooled briefly in the early 2000s. Perhaps collectors assumed the initial rush was over, that the error was not as rare as it first appeared. Prices plateaued, hovering in the mid-hundreds, and Gerald wondered if he'd missed his chance. But as years passed, something curious happened. The coins began to vanish from the market. Those who owned them held on, refusing to sell. New collectors, who had grown up in the state quarter era, started looking back at earlier Washington quarters with fresh eyes. Demand surged again. By 2015, examples in pristine condition were commanding thousands, and by 2020, whispers of five-figure private sales began to circulate. Gerald, now older and more reflective, couldn't help but smile at how far the coin had come. He still hadn't sold his own. He wasn't sure he ever would. What made this error so captivating wasn't just its rarity. It was the way it toyed with the very design that Americans had known for decades. The double die affected both sides, giving Washington's stately profile an almost spectral quality, as though he were caught mid-turn. The eagle, too, looked somehow alive, its feathers splitting and overlapping in impossible ways. The letters warped into strange shadows of themselves, as though whispering secrets from another dimension. It wasn't just an error, it was art born of accident. Then came the twist no one saw coming. In 2023, a collector on the West Coast unveiled something that sent shockwaves through the numismatic world. During an estate sale, he uncovered a 1996 quarter with an even more dramatic doubling, so pronounced that parts of the design seemed almost three-dimensional. Unlike the known examples, this coin bore evidence of a second, lesser-known error, a partial collar strike that gave the rim a slightly raised, uneven edge. Experts who examined it were stunned. Somehow, this single coin combined two errors, an extreme double die and a partial collar, into one extraordinary piece. The revelation reignited interest in the 1996 error. Forums buzzed with speculation. Could others like it be out there, hidden in jars and drawers? Was this particular coin a unique hybrid, or just the first of a new variety yet to be discovered? Auctions began to heat up once again. One collector reportedly offered six figures for the hybrid, though the owner declined, choosing instead to display it at a major coin show under heavy glass and brighter lights. Even Gerald, who thought he'd seen everything, made the trip to see in person. Standing there, leaning over the velvet ropes, he felt that familiar thrill, that quiet hum in his chest. He thought of all the years he'd spent searching, all the hours squinting at tiny details, all the coins that had passed through his hands without so much as a second glance. This little slip of metal, a quarter most people would spend without a thought, had captured his imagination and refused to let go as he looked at the hybrid error gleaming under the lights. Gerald slipped his hand in his pocket and felt for his own 1996 error, still tucked safely in its holder. He smiled faintly. Its story wasn't finished yet. Neither was his. In 2004, the United States Mint pressed ahead with its ambitious 50-state quarters program, a decade-long tribute to each of the 50 states. That year, Florida's turn arrived, and its chosen design celebrated its rich history and coastal legacy. The coin featured a Spanish galleon, a space shuttle in flight, and a palm-fringed peninsula jutting into the sea. A striking combination of exploration, progress, and natural beauty. Millions of these quarters were struck at the Philadelphia and Denver mints, and they quickly entered circulation, their fresh designs catching the eyes of casual spenders and avid collectors alike. In the haze of production, with presses running at blistering speeds to meet demand, no one at the mint suspected that anything unusual had slipped past inspection. But somewhere deep within the ranks of those millions, a few coins bore subtle scars of an unexpected and unnoticed mishap that on a crisp autumn morning years later, a collector named Vincent wandered through a weekend coin market tucked behind an old library in New Jersey. He had no particular mission that day, just a quiet ritual of browsing and hoping to be surprised. Vincent was no stranger to oddities. His small apartment was lined with binders of off-center strikes, clipped planchets, and die cracks, each one telling its own accidental story. At one corner table, an elderly seller had poured a jumble of state quarters into a shallow tray marked face value. Your pick. Vincent sifted through them lazily, watching the sunlight play off their clad surfaces. One Florida quarter caught his eye, not because of its design, but because something felt wrong the moment he picked it up. It was subtle at first. The space shuttle looked doubled, not in the way the engraving intended, but ghosted, as though a second shuttle shadowed the first. He turned it over and studied the obverse. Washington's profile showed faint but unmistakable doubling along the nose, lips, and the date. His fingers tingled as he held the coin to the light. On closer inspection, the letters spelling Florida stretched oddly, slightly offset, their edges soft and split. Vincent's heart began to pound. He'd seen photographs of double dies before, but never expected to hold one from this modern series, much less plucked from a bargain tray. He paid his quarter without another word, slipping it into his palm as though it were nothing at all, though his pulse betrayed him. The dealer didn't notice his silence or the way he gripped the coin tight as he walked away. Vincent sat on a bench outside, the coin resting in his palm, catching the morning sun. His mind spun with possibility in the weeks that followed. He pored over every reference he could find. He joined online forums and uploaded magnified photos, sparking instant debate. Some dismissed it as machine doubling, a common and far less valuable flaw. But others, sharper eyes with more experience, disagreed. The doubling was too strong, too distinct, and, crucially, it was on elements of both obverse and reverse. A respected expert in Florida error coins reached out privately, asking for a chance to see the coin in person. Vincent shipped it off, his hands shaking as he sealed the padded envelope, afraid of what he might or might not hear back. The wait dragged on longer than he expected. Days became weeks, and at times he convinced himself he'd imagined it all. But then a call came late one evening. The expert's voice was calm, but carried a weight that made Vincent sit up straight. The coin was indeed a dramatic double die, most pronounced on the reverse, especially the shuttle, the sails of the galleon, and the Florida inscription, but also showing clear doubling on Washington's profile and date. It was a rare variety, they said, one of only a handful confirmed, and perhaps the sharpest example yet documented. The news traveled quickly through collector circles. At first, the offers were modest, cautious. A few $100s, then a few thousand. Vincent declined them all, his instinct telling him this coin had more to give. In the years that followed, more examples surfaced, some faint, some strong, but none quite as crisp as his. Auction houses began to take notice. One coin sold in 2010 for just under $10,000. Another in 2015 reached nearly $20,000. Each sale seemed to awaken more interest, and yet as demand grew, the supply of examples remained stubbornly low. Vincent kept his close, watching the market climb. By 2020, collectors spoke of the 2004 Florida double die with a kind of reverence usually reserved for older, more classic errors. This was, after all, a state quarter, a series minted in the hundreds of millions. Yet here was a mistake hiding in plain sight, overlooked for years. It defied expectations, and that made it irresistible. By 2023, whispers of five-figure private sales began to circulate. Collectors who once dismissed modern errors were now competing fiercely for a chance to own even an imperfect specimen. What made this particular error so striking was how it transformed the coin's story. The Florida design was already dynamic, but the doubling gave it a surreal, almost cinematic quality. The space shuttle appeared to launch twice, its boosters shadowed in metal. The galleon's sails looked caught in a phantom wind, duplicated and stretched. The palm trees leaned into their doubled trunks like figures from a dream. Even Washington himself bore faint ghost lines across his face, as if peering from two moments at once. But the true surprise came in early 2024, when a collector in Texas unveiled a specimen with an even more extraordinary feature. Not only did it exhibit the same double die characteristics, but it also bore a dramatic broad strike, a rare error in which the coin is struck outside the confines of the collar, resulting in a slightly enlarged, smooth-edged quarter. This combination of errors had never before been documented on a Florida state quarter. Experts were stunned, scrambling to examine it in person. Photos of the hybrid error spread like wildfire across forums and auction previews, igniting fresh waves of excitement. Vincent flew down to Texas to see it himself. He stood in the quiet of the exhibition room, the hybrid quarter encased under glass. Even he, who'd spent years with his own prize, felt a sharp thrill at the sight. The doubled shuttle and galleon gleamed under the lights, the soft broad-strike rim giving the coin an ethereal halo. As he watched collectors line up to see it, he thought of how easily his own find could have slipped through his fingers, unnoticed, spent at a gas station, or dropped into a soda machine. When the hybrid coin went to auction, the bidding was fierce and relentless. The gavel finally fell at a jaw-dropping $145,000, shattering expectations and setting a new benchmark for the variety. Even standard examples of the 2004 Florida double die now regularly command anywhere between $43,000 and $145,000, depending on condition and prominence of the doubling. Vincent still has his coin. He holds it from time to time, letting the doubled shuttle and galleon catch the light, thinking of how a single mistake at the mint turned an ordinary state quarter into a legendary treasure. And though he's been tempted by offers, he smiles quietly to himself each time he turns them down, knowing the story of the 2004 Florida double die still has more chapters to come. In 2007, the United States Mint continued its celebrated 50-state quarters program with a tribute to Wyoming. The design chosen for the state's coin was as simple as it was iconic. The silhouette of a bucking horse and rider, a timeless emblem of Wyoming's rugged heritage and frontier spirit. Millions of these coins poured out of the Philadelphia and Denver mints, flooding into circulation alongside the rest of the series. For most people, the Wyoming quarter was just another pocket piece, another sliver of change to be spent and forgotten. But as the presses hammered out their endless stream of coins, a few pieces slipped through bearing flaws no one at the mint noticed. Those flaws would turn a plain state quarter into something far more intriguing and, in time, much more valuable. Years later, a collector named Meredith was leafing through a box of change on her father's workbench. Her father had passed away not long before, and she'd been left to sort through his quiet little world of half-finished projects, coffee cans full of nails, and jars of coins he'd kept for reasons she couldn't always guess. Meredith wasn't a collector herself, but something about the coins reminded her of him, his patience, his habit of noticing small things others missed. She tipped the contents of a dusty jar onto the table and began scanning through the dull copper and nickel surfaces, idly turning them in the light point one quarter caught her attention. The Wyoming State Quarter, dated 2007, gleamed differently somehow. At first glance, it was unremarkable, but when she tilted it under the lamp, the details of the rider and horse looked wrong. She leaned closer. The letters in Wyoming seemed uneven, almost stretched. The "In God We Trust" inscription showed faint shadows of itself, as if etched twice. The bucking horse's outline blurred at the edges, ghosted just enough to catch her eye. She slipped it into her pocket and took it home. That night, she pulled up pictures of Wyoming quarters online, comparing hers against standard images. The difference became clearer. The doubling of the text and the faintly doubled horse and rider stood out now that she knew where to look. She even noticed a faint ridge near the rim, like a soft halo where it should have been sharp. Curiosity turned to resolve as she dug deeper. She found her way into online communities, posting high-resolution photos and asking for opinions. The first replies were cautious. Modern quarters often showed machine doubling, they said. But the closer the experts looked, the more intrigued they became. The doubling was too sharp, too consistent across the coin's devices, and critically, it appeared strongest on the state-specific design, a rare and prized feature among error collectors. Meredith boxed it up carefully and sent it off to a grading service at the advice of one collector. The weeks waiting for the results dragged on like years. When the email finally arrived, she stared at it in disbelief. The graders had confirmed it. An authentic double-die Wyoming quarter, one of the cleanest examples yet documented. It was subtle enough to escape detection by casual eyes, but undeniable once seen, and rare enough to spark immediate attention. Word spread fast. Other collectors began rifling through their own state quarters, hopeful to find a match. A few additional examples turned up, though none quite as strong as Meredith's. Auction houses began featuring the error in their catalogs. Early sales were modest at first, a few $1,000s, climbing higher each time as more people learned of its existence. Over the years, the value crept upward. By 2015, well-preserved examples were fetching more than $15,000 at auction. As the supply remained small, demand only grew. The Wyoming quarter's unusual doubling on the state-specific horse and rider lent a mystique that other errors lacked. It became a sort of quiet legend among modern coin collectors, a symbol of how even the most ubiquitous designs could still surprise. The coin itself had a kind of haunting beauty. The double horse and rider looked like a moving figure caught in motion, their outlines split in two as if bucking through time. The words "In God We Trust" appeared to shimmer, each letter faintly echoing itself. The date at the bottom showed similar doubling, subtle yet undeniable. Collectors loved to tilt it under the light, letting the ghosted images reveal themselves one by one, but the story didn't end there. In 2021, a collector in Oregon discovered a specimen with a unique twist. This coin bore the same distinctive double die features as Meredith's, but also displayed a remarkable off-center strike, leaving a portion of the blank planchet exposed at the rim. The combination was spectacular, a double die and an off-center error on the same Wyoming quarter. Experts scrambled to examine it, and when it came to auction, bidding was feverish. Meredith attended the auction herself, her own coins safely in her purse. She watched as the hybrid error soared past expectation after expectation, her heart pounding as the price climbed higher and higher. She thought of her father's workbench, of the quiet little jar of coins that had sat unnoticed for years. When the final bid was called, the room erupted in applause. The hybrid Wyoming error had sold for an astonishing $130,000, shattering records for modern state quarter errors. Even standard examples of the double die variety now routinely sold between $40,000 and $130,000, depending on condition and strength of the doubling. Meredith smiled quietly as she slipped her own coin back in her purse, thinking of how an ordinary Wyoming quarter had become a treasure, a hidden gem that carried not just history and error, but also a memory of patience and sharp eyes. And though she hadn't yet decided whether to sell, she already knew its true value lay in the story it told.